Live, you guys. Live.
We're here.
Back. We're here. We're back. Welcome, everyone out in chat. We see you. Thank you for joining us today. Yeah, it's been a while, you guys. It's been a while. This is the first CASA live stream of 2021. No, I'm just kidding. 2022. They all flow together for me, you guys. I can't keep them straight anymore. 2020 has just been a trilogy. So anyways, happy new year to everybody out there. I hope that your new years have been going well, splendid, good, all the good words. We'll get the show started. We're going to try to hustle along through the first bit here, I guess, because we do have some goody good things to get to later. We have a special guest joining us in the later half of the show here. So we'll start the show out with some hey, how are yas? Kristen, hey, how are you?
I'm doing good, actually. Excited for the new year. Everybody's healthy, and I became a grandma.
Congratulations.
I'm not old enough to be a grandma. No. I'm just kidding. Yeah, she was born last week, and I have yet to see her because they live up in northern Michigan. So we're hoping to, as soon as Mama's ready to do some traveling, we are gonna get him some gas money and tell him to come visit and stay so I can meet my first grandbaby.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
congrats to you.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, congrats.
But other than that, not much. Otherwise, same old.
Same old. Alex, hey, how are you?
Cold.
Yeah, I feel you on that.
It's warmed up to about 2 degrees, but yeah, we have an old house, and all the windows are leaky and suck, and our furnace is its last season. So and you always find that out when you finally turn the heat on because you need it.
Yeah.
So, and then the rest of my day has been spent combing through a little over 2,000 bills that showed up in our search results. And I've whittled that down to 2016.
Oh, okay.
So not all of them are vaping bills. A lot of them are just we get a lot of extra stuff that gets caught in the search. So
right, you're the final filter.
Yeah, I'm on the verge of starting a headache now. So glad to take a break.
Yeah. Well, now you get to stare at a bright screen for the next hour and a half. So that'll definitely
like I've been doing all day. Yeah.
Awesome. It'll definitely help. Well, good. I'm glad that we're all. I'm sorry about your headache. That's not good. But I'm glad that we're here. I'm glad that we're back doing what we do here. So for me, it's just been same old. I'm just dealing with snow, and we've got a big storm moving in on Monday. So we're just prepping, I guess. That's it. That's been my weekend so far. It's just been grocery shopping, prepping for this storm, all that fun stuff.
Was there any milk and bread left?
Yep. We got milk and bread. We even got cream cheese. There was this big to-do about a cream cheese shortage. I heard all the radio stations talking about a cream cheese shortage, and we went to the store. They had plenty of cream cheese. So I don't know.
Of all the things.
Yeah.
Well, the media lies.
I just made some bomb fresh salsa, though. Fresh salsa. That's what I just got done doing. I still smell like peppers and onions. Anyway,
then you pour that over the top of the. What you do then? You pour that over the top of the block of cream cheese, and then you spread it on chips.
Yes, absolutely. That sounds good. Oh man, we made buffalo wing dip. Made buffalo wing dip the other day too. That was what the cream cheese was for.
Oh,
fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah, so good. But otherwise, that's really it for me. So yeah, Alex, if you are ready, we can get into some hot and spicy legislation, all 2016 bills that you've been looking at.
Sure, I'm going to get it all in 20 minutes.
All right, let's do it. Let's do it right now. It's been so long that I almost couldn't find that bumper. I was like, where is this bumper? I haven't done this in a year. All right, the floor is yours, sir. What do we need to know? What are we keeping our eyes and ears on this week?
That heavy sigh. Oh my God.
You're gonna need
That's my annual January. My annual January sigh
No.
So, but I'll start it off with a little bit of maybe positive news, depending on how you fall on where you fall on this. Starting off in New Hampshire, right next door to me, SB 314 would introduce a tax reduction for modified risk tobacco products. So this means things like Swedish snus, Swedish match products that have actually gone through the process, and companies that can afford the MRTP process can have this tax reduction applied to their products. It's at the state level. And this would also include things like the 22nd century very low nicotine cigarette. I believe it's hard to kind of figure out this language for me. It seems like that type of product might be eligible for a 25% tax reduction, while modified risk or reduced risk products like Swedish snus would be able to get the 50% discount. CASA is supportive of this language. First of all, we don't support extra taxes on these products, but if those extra taxes exist, low risk products should be entitled to a lower tax rate. And so I wrote a very brief email in support of this bill to the committee. There was a hearing on January 12th. I have not updated the progress of this bill. Usually you don't see like the next committee assignment for a little bit. So keeping tabs on this, and whether or not we need to get everybody to voice their support for this or not isn't clear yet. But if that does come to be a necessity, then we'll put something out. Otherwise, if you live in New Hampshire, strongly encourage you to reach out to lawmakers and support this bill. That's SB 314, and we'll follow this and have more details on it later. And we've seen this type of language cropping up. Actually, the CFO of 22nd Century did some time on CNBC recently, promoting the fact that they are going to be pushing for this legislation around the country. And I'm sure that's, all told, that's just another tobacco company voice in support of this. And of course, we all know that the tobacco companies' lobbying power far outstrips anything that the vapor industry or vaping community has come up with. So yeah, but always good to be able to support something. So that is New Hampshire. Colorado, this just dropped yesterday. This is a flavor ban. This is HB 1064.
Do you have anything that we can pull up visually, or?
The bill page, sure.
Yeah, if you wanted to.
I didn't come armed with visual aids. So
I'm putting you on the spot right now.
and to be honest, they're kind of boring. Oh wait, I got to do the share screen thing here. Everybody knows what a bill looks like. There you go. It's a bunch of text on a page. So this is a flavor ban, and it would also incorporate synthetic nicotine into a ban on flavors. Again, we said this last year. The synthetic nicotine workaround is not likely to last for very long, not at the state level anyway. Certainly the FDA is going to have some challenges adopting their regulations, but we're going to see this all over the place in states that haven't already done it. And so Colorado banning flavors and including synthetic nicotine in that ban. Don't have a call to action up for this just yet. Like I said, it was introduced, as far as I can tell, yesterday. And so we'll see what the progress of this is. There was an article, I think, Kristen, you tweeted this from our main account, that this was, or somebody else, I don't know if it was us or someone else, but I read that the author of the article said that this was in response to Denver's mayor vetoing the flavor ban there. So obviously a lot of work being done in Colorado to ban flavors and take safer products away from people. So this was kind of expected. But be on the lookout for that in Colorado, and we'll update a call to action as soon as we get more information. Indiana also has a flavor ban on the books. You will have to forgive me if I don't capture all of the bills that might ban flavors or add taxes or place bans or anything like that. I'm still just going through a massive list of things that showed up in search. But HB 1379 is the one that I picked up today. I think one of our volunteers dropped it in a chat to us as well. So this is exactly what it is. It's a flavor ban. And we will, again, update that as committee hearings are scheduled or we get more information from folks on the ground about how this bill is progressing. Washington, the state, has HB 1676, which would change the tax rate on vapor products. It would change it from the bifurcated tax structure that exists now. The taxation now is 27 cents per milliliter on the closed systems and 9 cents per milliliter for open bottles. The proposed tax rate is a 33% retail tax, which I believe would be one of, if not the highest retail taxes in the country. I think New York's is like 20%. So Washington State going for the title there. If you are interested, Kristen, you have these links. If anybody is interested in watching the public hearing that happened this week, first of all, thank you to everyone who submitted their opposition to this bill. We outnumbered the support by at least 100 people. And the hearing was just ripe with misinformation and lies as usual from supporters of the bill. They came armed with, or they were equipped with, horrible talking points, dismissing the experiences of millions of people across the country who have actually quit smoking by switching to vaping or other smoke-free alternatives. So thanks for that horrible presentation the other day in Washington State. We will update this. We have a call to action up for this, but really it was just encouraging people to sort of register their opposition to the bill. This was in a finance committee, so they are primarily focused on economic impact of this legislation. There will likely be, depending on whether or not this moves out of committee, which I would assume is likely to happen, there will be another hearing in a health-oriented committee. So look for an updated call to action as that progresses. Washington State, again, is also looking at a bill that would direct the Department of Health, I believe, to promulgate a rule limiting the concentration of nicotine in vapor products and other things. I just glanced through this and didn't finish my notes on it before I came on, so I'm sorry if I don't have all the details here. But it would the health department would be tasked with coming up with a nicotine cap, and it would ban the use of nicotine salts. We can all probably name at least one manufacturer who's going to have a very big problem with that, and I'm sure there are others out there. And of course, these nicotine caps, we expect to see more of those around the country as we go forward. That is Senate Bill 5768. Sorry. And as that progresses, again, we'll probably update or put out our own call to action for that. Moving right along to the wonderful state of Maine, the LD 1550, the flavor ban from 2021, is still in play. I believe we mentioned that. This has been referred to the Committee on Health and Human Services. I do not have a date for a hearing or meeting as of yet, but we will have to refresh our engagement on that and get out the new information as soon as it becomes available. So Maine flavor ban, still a threat. New Jersey, moving into enacted legislation. This is one that we've been talking about as to what we need to publish about this, or any opinion that Kasa has on this. Assembly Bill 6020, that's 6020. This has been passed. The governor has not signed it yet, so it is not enacted. And I'm not quite sure what's going to happen here, because we were trying to figure out if there is another example of the state, of any state, requiring a retailer to carry any product. The only things I can think of is perhaps there are situations where, in the cases of potentially dangerous items, fireworks, boats, whatever that retailers may be required to sell certain like accompanying safety equipment. But I don't know. I don't do boating or fireworks, so I can't tell you whether or not a state might require someone to also sell fire extinguishers. But this bill in New Jersey requires retailers, whether they're tobacco dealers or vapor sellers, to sell nicotine replacement therapy. I don't know whether or not this is just, lawsuit ready, but it seems like something that should be followed by a lawsuit. And that's in New Jersey. So there we go.
Yeah, I know one of the few, we were having a discussion about in the case of motorcycles. If motorcycle retailers like a Harley shop or something like that is required to sell helmets, and I don't think they are. I don't have an actual answer. I don't think they are. I think they just do, for the sake of selling helmets. It's an upsell. They can, make more money that way, kind of thing. But when you think of it, like not every state requires a helmet when you ride a motorcycle. So I think I don't know if it varies or whatever, but I mean, I agree. I think that's something that's just ripe and ready for a lawsuit challenge, forcing a retailer to also carry an additional product that they may not have any interest in selling, are unknowledgeable of, or for a number of reasons.
Yeah,
that's certainly customers don't even want.
Yeah, to force a retailer to sell a product.
I mean, certainly, as you mentioned, as we've discussed, privately, this I think this sets a pretty dangerous precedent.
Yeah,
and it's something for retailers. It's along the lines of very high wholesale taxes, right? You're forcing retailers to purchase or pay a tax on something that there's really no guarantee that they're going to sell. In this case, requiring retailers to sell NRT, which I believe have their own expiration date. It's sort of a tax in and of itself.
Because you're forcing them to stock, pay for and stock something in their shelves that may not ever sell, and then they have to restock and so on and so forth.
And it sets a dangerous precedent, I think, that the state stepping in and requiring retailers to sell a certain thing. Again, I could be totally wrong. I don't know the total history around this particular laws like this, or if there are any other retailers that are required by states to sell certain things. So anyway, I bring it up because it's, I don't know if we're going to see more of this. New Jersey is not typically a leader in tobacco thinking outside the box, inside the box tobacco control strategies. So
I mean, clearly with a bill like this.
Well, one of the things I brought up was, if somebody says, "Oh, well, it's not that it's such a bad idea." Well, could you imagine if companies start lobbying to get on a list of required sales? I mean, look at 22nd century cigarettes, very low nicotine cigarettes. What if they lobbied to force vape shops to sell those too?
Yeah.
So anybody who's fine with this, stop and think about that.
I mean, what's the sales pitch to a convenience store? Like, hey, we've got these very low nicotine cigarettes that really nobody wants. You should totally sell them. Like, no. So it may come to that states step in and say, if you're going to sell cigarettes, you have to sell very low nicotine cigarettes too.
Yeah.
And
again, I know that we hate the term slippery slope, but it feels like one of those situations, right? Like if this is kind of the catalyst for something where retailers are forced to sell even more or other products on top of that, or what have you, or what other products make their way into that category of need to sell these on the side as well. Yeah, required sales. So I know that we don't prefer the term slippery slope here, but just for the sake of I don't know, getting it out there, I think it is kind of a slippery slope.
I do want to. I'm sorry. I'm gonna cut you guys off because I only have 6 more minutes, and I'm gonna make this. Yes. I'm gonna make this happen here. I got one more in the stuff that may get a call to action here.
Back to it.
Yeah, maybe. So moving on to New Mexico, another new state. HB 33. Again, this is the modified risk tobacco product tax reduction. This was pre-filed. It is awaiting pre-file. The date on it is January 18th, so it hasn't actually been introduced yet, but this would raise the tax on cigarettes to 20 cents a cigarette, reduce the tax by 50% for cigarettes with MRTP. That's the very low nicotine cigarettes. And it has very much the same or similar tax reduction language as New Hampshire. So as I said, expect to see more of these bills around the country.
Did you say 20 cents per cigarette?
Correct.
So you'd be looking at $4 a pack?
That would be the state tax on cigarettes in New Mexico. Yeah, that's pretty high.
Is that a 20-cent increase, or that would be the new tax?
It's a raise. So it whatever. I didn't write down in the notes what the current tax is, but
okay.
That it may be 10 cents a cigarette. I don't know.
Right.
But that is a tax hike on cigarettes, which comes with its own issues. Certainly, people will be trying to dodge that tax and get the cigarettes that they like for cheaper.
Sure. Yeah.
This bill also adds synthetic nicotine to the definition of tobacco product. Again, expect to see that at the state level all over the place. And certainly there are people in the industry who are supportive of that language. And so I guess the probability of that becoming law is pretty high in terms of as far as regulating synthetic nicotine like other tobacco products. So I have two more bills left, and I have these under the interesting bills section. In Vermont,
that you have an interesting bills section.
Yeah, well, they're sort of bills I'm not quite sure what to do with, and we need to kind of work on our own opinions about this. But I'll start with Vermont. H602 would prohibit the sale of tobacco products utilizing single-use filters. We briefly touched on this when we were talking about the new policy in New Zealand. New Zealand has outlawed the sale of cigarettes with filters. And part of the rationale for this is that filters make cigarettes more palatable, but they don't actually reduce any harm. There is also the issue of litter, of cigarette butts that do not biodegrade, and in fact, are a source of contamination in the environment for all kinds of things. And if you are really interested, I love. Now I'm drawing. I have a mental block now. The woman from New York who runs the smokers' rights groups. One of the things that she does. Audrey Silk. Yes, Audrey Silk. When she goes to a park or an area where smoking is prohibited, she always does her own surveillance and recon to see whether or not people are actually following the rules. And you can do that, of course, by looking at cigarette butts everywhere. So anyway, this is an interesting policy, and it basically makes cigarettes less palatable for people. But this is also sort of in that very heavy-handed kind of regulation that's likely to push people to an underground market and get the cigarettes, the full flavor, full nicotine cigarettes with filters that they are accustomed to. So this is kind of a mixed bag here. I think from on a personal note, I don't, I always joke about if you want to make cars safer, you take the airbags out and you put a 10-inch metal spike on the steering wheel and people won't go above 25 miles an hour.
Right, because you're terrified of being impaled.
Exactly. And this gets into road design and traffic stuff. If you want to make the roads safer, you have to make them terrifying. And so this is a very similar kind of thread. Anyway, it's an interesting bill to me, and I'll be curious to see how far it gets in Vermont. I believe there is there's a bill in New York that's very similar, and I just haven't gotten to it yet in our massive list of legislation. But expect to see things like this around the country. Certainly New Zealand has already implemented it. And so expect some New Zealand fans to maybe try it here.
At the very least, it does acknowledge that filtered cigarettes are not any safer for you than an unfiltered cigarette.
Right. So the very last one, I'm getting this down with 1 minute to go. Utah, HB 34 is looking at cigarette tax amendments that would add heat not burn products to the definition of a cigarette. For those who have been following the heat not burn progress in the United States, the heat sticks in about 1/3 or 2/3 of the states already meet the description of a cigarette and so are already subject to cigarette taxes. And so Utah is changing their code to allow for taxation of heat not burn products, just like cigarettes. Heat not burn products, which, by the way, have received an MRTP order from the FDA. So stuff like this goes hand in hand with the tax reduction for modified risk products, and just keeping an eye on that. Not quite sure whether or not CASA engages on this. It sounds like something we would get involved in, because raising taxes on lower risk products is not something that we support. So all of that having been said, that is the legislative rundown as much as I've got so far, and I'm sure I'll have more next weekend. There you have it. Ta-da.
You don't have to have more next weekend. We're fine with that.
Yeah. Do we really need more?
Apparently.
There's always more though, right? Like, I feel like this is one of those spaces where we kind of never run out of things to keep an eye on.
Yeah, well,
it's a good thing we don't
state and local level.
It's a good thing we don't have a research segment, because I could be like updating you on all the poo-poo research that comes out every week. That's a never-ending thing. I know how Alex feels, because it seems like every day there's another stupid research study that comes out against vaping that it's just cross-sectional, and asks all the wrong questions, or erectile dysfunction and secondhand vapor and strokes and heart attacks and depression.
One thing that I am just now remembering that I kind of forgot to mention here because I didn't write it down was all of the bills in Michigan that we were following. I haven't gotten through all of the Michigan stuff that shows up on our scan, and I'll just show you what that looks like. Here you go. This is, and it's not all tobacco, but these are all the bills in Michigan I need to weed through here. But I have not come to the new versions of, these might be it right here, what we were following last year. Yeah, these are from 2021. So we are in a 2-year legislative session. That's typically what happens. So a lot of the bills that we saw in the TIBARD package of tobacco control bills that we saw last year are likely to come back. I know Mark Sliss popped his head in here earlier, so he may have some insights to add to that. And like I said, I'm still weeding through all of this stuff to figure out what's active and what we need to engage on immediately. But Michigan, again, could be looking at that package of tobacco control bills.
Though, thanks for that little tidbit. Heat not burn sticks are taxed as pipe tobacco, which has a lower tax rate compared to normal cigarettes in Germany. So there's some tax reduction happening there, at least in heat not burn compared to combustible cigarettes in Germany. I don't believe our guest is here yet. I don't see our guest kind of in the back room with us just yet. So I guess that concludes the legislative rundown. We are not quite ready for our deep dive. We're still waiting on our guest, but I have something that I think that we could maybe fill a little time with and have a quick discussion on that I think is just absolutely absurd. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to do a little screen share here. Have you ever considered bird watching when trying to quit smoking? This is CDC's recommendation. Bird watching is a great way to de-stress and keep your mind off nicotine cravings. On National Bird Day, which was January 5th, watch some birds and help your smoke-free life soar. What do you guys think of bird watching? Alex, when you were trying to quit smoking, we're like, you know what? I'm going to go check out some birds.
I'm curious if they'll have a similar post for Flag Day.
Ooh.
Like, have you considered watching the flag?
Yeah. Have you considered going outside? Like, it's so tone deaf, right? Like, you see this whenever there's some kind of national holiday or something like this, some way that they can work these ideas together to post about this national thing. And it's just tone deaf it doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't, if this resonates with you, if bird watching is what helps you stay smoke free, bird watch all the birds, watch every bird you can watch, right? Like, if
I
that's
think
the goal.
I think that advice is for the birds. And on that note, our guest is here. Our guest is here.
Oh, our guest is here. Okay, awesome, fantastic. I can get out of here. I just wanted to fill some time with that. I thought it was a fun little tidbit of information from the CDC. So if you guys are ready, we are definitely ready for
do our bumper.
Some deep dive action. Absolutely. Helen.
Hey.
Hello.
Welcome, everyone. Everyone, this is Helen Redmond. She's our special guest today. Helen, how are you?
Good. Can you hear me?
We can. Yep. We can hear you.
Okay,
we
good.
can see you. We can see you. We can see you. I just can't work apparently. But welcome. Thanks for joining us.
You. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
Okay.
All right. So we've got some fun stuff to discuss today on the topics of harm reduction. And I guess before we really get into anything, if you could just kind of tell everybody here who you are, what you do, how you got into all of this realm, this world of harm reduction, specifically tobacco harm reduction as well. Some background.
I just want to say first, I did hear the end of that conversation about the CDC and the birds, and I think bird watching is for the birds. I'm with Kristen on that one. Give me a break. You saw Annie Claycamp's piece in Filter?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
About that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Right. I thought it was really on point.
Yeah.
So
I'll share the link to that.
Sorry?
No, go ahead. I'm just saying I'm going to real quick find the link to that to share in the chat, but you go on, please.
Okay.
Tell them
Cool.
who you are and stuff.
Well, I wear a couple different hats. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've worked with people who use drugs for many, many years. And I'm also a writer. I've been writing about the war on drugs for 2 decades. So I come to tobacco harm reduction as a veteran of the war on drugs in the United States. And I've written about various aspects, from what happens in our country to Mexico to Afghanistan. I've been to that country and reported on methadone and heroin use. And then I'm also a documentary filmmaker. And one of the things I make a fair amount of short docs about is about nicotine, about people who use nicotine, who smoke, vulnerable populations. So those are the 3 hats that I wear. And I started writing, I thought about it the other day. I started really getting into tobacco harm reduction around 2015. So for about 6 years now, I've really had a concentration on tobacco harm reduction. So that's just a little bit about me.
Yeah. I do remember speaking to you in the past. For anybody who doesn't know, I used to have a podcast long before I joined CASA and we started this live program here. It was called the Rise and Vape podcast. And I had the opportunity to have Helen on back then, and we got to discuss some of these things. And for anybody curious, where can they find your short documentaries, those short films that you do? Because they are fantastic.
They're on the Filter website.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I know that we had brought that up back then, and I'm so excited to sit here and talk to you again today because it's been so long since we've had the opportunity to really speak on this stuff. But yeah, for anybody out there, check those short films out because they are excellent. They are excellent. So one of the things that I guess I wanted to ask you is what do you think is one of the biggest hurdles right now in tobacco harm reduction in general, given that we're in the thralls of this progressive drug legalization movement, and we're seeing this shift towards legalization and medicalization of psychedelics and cannabis and other drugs, illicit drugs. But yet we're seeing this real big surge and this kind of newer war on nicotine specifically, as opposed to the older just war on smoking. That war has kind of shifted. What do you see in general as like what are the big hurdles for us? Where are we coming up short? Why are we seeing this divergence and all of that happening?
I don't think that much has changed in terms of what we're up against. I think it's pretty much the same stuff, and that is lots of junk science, misinformation, a corporate mainstream media that is allergic to interviewing anybody. There's been a few breakthroughs, but in general does not interview people who are pro-vaping or do science around vaping and nicotine use. Is almost a total absence of that. There's a new piece out in the New York Times, I'm sure you saw it, that's saying young people are going back to smoking and it's cool again. And in that piece, I think it was Ken Warner that they gave him one sentence. Ken Warner or somebody else who is pro-vaping. And so we're up against that. And it's the same stuff that from the beginning when vaping really took off. It's the same people who are opposed to it. I don't want to be all doom and gloom because the genie is out of the bottle. It's never going back in. It's not. Vaping is here to stay. And drug wars, we haven't ended it 100%, but you mentioned cannabis and psychedelics. And it's really interesting because not everything, but a lot of what they say about nicotine use and vaping is what they used to say about cannabis and psychedelics. They're dangerous. Cannabis and the psychedelics can cause mental illness, schizophrenia. They're gateways, right? And right. And I've been part of a group of harm reductionists now for a long time, and we've been fighting to legalize cannabis, fighting to legalize psychedelics, and it's enormously satisfying. It's a bright light in kind of a dark sky that we have in many states legalized cannabis and now psychedelics, psilocybin, the other, LSD, ketamine, MDMA. It's enormously satisfying that our struggle paid off. Obviously, the thing about nicotine that's different, it's never been illegal.
Right.
So you don't have to wage that fight. But it means that people change their minds about things. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Sure.
But the enemies and the issues are still the same as they were 5 years ago, right? They might be worse. I don't know. What do y'all think?
Do you think
I have a question, and I think Janine Timmons used the word I was going to use, which is script. We've seen a lot of movement in I think the public health realm and in the policy world and in corporate America to acknowledge people, to have this diversity, inclusion. I forget what the E stands for, the DEI, and what is it? Equity. Yeah, diversity, equity, inclusion. There is this movement, and when it comes to drug policy, it seems that more and more people are coming around to acknowledging that there are people who use drugs, and we're not just a bunch of addicts and drug users and all of the stigmatized language that you would see. But that attitude is not moving over to tobacco. For some reason, tobacco is siloed off. And so my question is more of, in your experience and in working in this field, is that an institutional thing, or is it just people bringing their personal bias into their careers?
I think that tobacco and alcohol, a little less with alcohol, they've never been integrated into the harm reduction family. Harm reduction all around the world actually has mainly focused on illegal drugs because that's where the drug war is aimed at, right? That's mass incarceration, undoing all of that. It's so the illegal drugs are the ones that all of these organizations have focused on. And I understand that because tobacco is legal, we don't have you know, I don't know, 500,000 people in prison because it's legal. So I think that's part of it. It's never been integrated into the larger world of drugs. And could it have really been, though, until vaping was invented? Because what is it that we could, you know, with opioids, we have maintenance medications, we have buprenorphine, we have methadone. You maintain people on them for as long as they want to. And we can do that now with these safer nicotine products. So I don't know if it could have, maybe it could have, but there's no reason it can't be now. But then the other one, it's always the, what do you call it? The thing in the room, and that's big tobacco. It's tobacco industry.
That's exactly what I was gonna ask you. Is if you think a big part of this is the you know, the need to bring down big tobacco. When we talk about nicotine for so long has just been completely really tied to cigarettes in most people's minds.
Right.
And there's a lot of misinformation out there. I think there was a study done at one point, something like 80% of doctors still believe that nicotine causes some form of harm, whether it be cancer or heart problems or lung disease or something along those lines. Which obviously, which is false. But I think because, you know, nicotine has been tied to tobacco for so long, and then big tobacco is evil, that's just a big player in the room. And we just don't simply want to acknowledge that nicotine is not the harmful component, and that, you know, cigarettes aren't the only place you can get nicotine. I feel like we forget about NRTs a lot of times in that conversation, and you know, safer nicotine products in general. Would you agree with that? Do you think that bias against big tobacco and that kind of looming shadow, that dark cloud of big tobacco kind of clouds the judgment here?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. It's always there. And we just have to patiently explain to people how vaping came to the United States, that it was people who smoked who created the industry, and then there's other players certainly, but tobacco companies weren't able to innovate in the way that others were. That's for real. And then we also live in a country that really still wants people to be abstinent. Abstinence-based drug policies. Whatever it is, you've got to stop. And millions of people love nicotine. Billions of people love nicotine. They're not going to stop. And so we have official policies that privilege abstinence over reducing harm. And they only want to reduce harm, but then you've got to move down the spectrum to then you be abstinent. And we know billions of people will never be abstinent from nicotine, nor do they need to. Then the other component, and I know you all know this, but I'll just say it, is that we have an entrenched group of organizations who are really engaged in a forever war. They want to fight forever to try to, I don't know, shut down tobacco companies, put them out of business. It's a forever war for them. And that's a big problem, because really these organizations could be put out of business if we could get safer nicotine products to every smoker who wanted them. They should want to be put out of business, right?
That's what they say.
Yeah, it often feels like, I guess for lack of a better term, like self-fulfilling prophecy a lot of times, you know, and that's kind of how they keep getting by. Because without lobbying against safer nicotine products, then you have more people smoking, then you can continue to fight smoking, you know, so the more you set yourself up to, like you said, for that forever war. That's where that funding is going to continue. I know that Kristen definitely has some questions for you. I know we discussed some things before the show, and I'm excited to hear this conversation.
Don't put me on the spot. You know, one of the things
good at that. It's one of my favorite things. I do it to Alex all the time, so I'm going to do it to you too.
Well, something popped in my head as we were talking that hadn't occurred to me sooner, but with you having been in other drug harm reduction, and you came over to tobacco harm reduction. So you were probably around a lot of people who are in drug harm reduction. And it seems like we're struggling getting them to come over. What do you think was it that made you went, yeah, that all makes sense. This is harm reduction, whereas other people just don't seem to be like ready to jump on board with tobacco harm reduction. They still see that as being something that's, I don't know. It's funny because they almost get anti-brain and they suddenly are like, oh no, they should just quit, or they should, like, which they've been saying for people who are addicted to other drugs, but you can't just do that. But yet when it comes to smoking or nicotine, it seems like they kind of turn into these anti-tobacco people. So what made you able to make that leap, and what do you think is holding back other people in that line of work from making that same leap?
Well, it happened because I worked with a woman at a social service, actually a harm reduction based housing program in Brooklyn. And my coworker, who is German, had been recently to Germany to see family, was a smoker, as was her partner, and they found vaping products there. And she brought it back. And we started talking about the people that we were working with in this harm reduction based housing program. And so many of them had either started moderating their drug use or dramatically cut back or stopped using. And the only thing left was cigarettes. And so we started thinking about that. And she had vaped and she was vaping and loving it. And we thought, we have a tool now to help people transition, because people from vulnerable populations, not everyone, but a lot, have the journey to transition is a lot longer. They have a lot of life challenges. Imagine being homeless and having a significant mental health problem and trying to transition. It's just not the same as somebody who has a nice warm home and support from family all around them. We know that. The more support you have, typically it's easier. And so we were in the setting, we said, we've got to try. We have this great product now, even though it wasn't so great back then. They've gotten so much better. And I think it's probably easier for people to transition out because you can get sufficient nicotine, you get a bigger throat hit if that's what you need. They're easier to use. You're not dripping juice everywhere, right? So it was really a colleague who showed me a vape and said, let's try. And that's where it started for me. I do want to say, another bright spot, I do feel like the international harm reduction community is coming to this conclusion that we need to integrate tobacco harm reduction. The people that I talk to all around the world, they are really, really interested in it because precisely what I said, many people leave their initial drug of choice, but the nicotine always seems to be the last one. And people say, just don't take it away from me. I want to do this. It's legal. I'm not going to go on Rikers for smoking a cigarette. And it's kind of, in a way, the last one. But I believe, prior to COVID and the international conferences, they very much welcomed sessions on tobacco harm reduction. And all the questions come up like, who's funding this? Is PMI behind it? What about Juul? What about all of those questions come up? Happy to have those debates and discussions. It's good to have that. But I think more and more around the world, people are realizing we have to get these products into the hands of people who use other drugs, because, I mean, that's the other thing. And I know you all know that. But if you use illicit drugs, the rates of smoking, I mean, the two go together, really.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's something I know that we've discussed here a lot on the show. Within, the drug using community and like you mentioned, within the houseless community, smoking rates are higher. And those are definitely challenges that can be met. We've talked about pros and cons of things like disposables, right, which can be a great thing in those communities as well. But yeah, I think that rings true. I don't know. I believe it rings true for Alex as well. Definitely with me. I had a problematic relationship with methamphetamine at one point in my life. And when I was getting off of meth, it was like, don't touch my cigarettes. You know, that was like the one thing, let me smoke, let me have this, while everybody is like, oh, Logan, that's great. You quit meth, now quit smoking. You know, and there's that additional added weight of now you need to do this, now you need to do this, now quit that thing. But I was very much in that camp of like, just let me smoke, you know. But yeah, there's definitely that. I would love to find a way where we can really, you know, take hold of those opportunities when we have people who are working on recovery, going through these different paths in their life, to also integrate that tobacco harm reduction in there and educate people there as well. And I just don't know. I don't work in those fields particularly. Do you see opportunities in your line of work where those things can be integrated in better, or how we can approach that situation and trying to work tobacco harm reduction more into those scenarios where people are seeking help for other substance use if they're smoking? Or is that something that maybe feels too much like that situation where it was like, okay, great, now you've quit doing this thing, now we want you to also quit this? Does it feel coercive? Is there a way to do that without being coercive?
The way I look at it is, you know, I've worked at New York harm reduction educators in East Harlem, and I've done vaping tobacco harm reduction groups, and I'm about to start one next month. And so one of the ways that we do this work is where there are agencies like New York Harm Reduction Educators, Lower East Side Harm Reduction, where there are syringe exchanges, wherever there are there's drop-in centers. Obviously, COVID-19 has changed how we can deliver some of those services. Doesn't mean we can't deliver them. Those are the places. Wherever people who use drugs go for services, that's where you have the vapes. Like I like to say, it's you hand the person a sterile syringe and a vape. Good to go. The North Carolina Survivors Union in Greensboro is doing a project. They have sterile syringe exchange. They have a drop-in program, and they're doing a study and a focus group so that they can help people transition. So wherever you're providing, there's mobile vans, right, that go into neighborhoods to do needle distribution. Have the vapes on the van.
Right.
Go to wherever they are. Go to homeless shelters. There's a study, perhaps you know, Sharon Cox and her colleagues in London. They're doing a study for people who are unhoused. How do we help them transition? Are they interested in these products? If they get them, can they bring them into the shelter? Are they losing them, or what works? And so that's really important too. So just going, you know, meeting people where they're at, and then let's do some studies, because there's going to be real challenges, right? Again, it's not like people who have a lot going for them and they just need to make a transition. I have a number of friends who it was fairly easy, but I know from doing these tobacco harm reduction vaping groups, there's many more challenges that have to be overcome. Not impossible, just harder and maybe longer.
Yeah. I feel like, you know, I guess just from personal experience, sometimes like I was in no shape to, you know, tackle quitting smoking at that point in my life. It was about, you know, do I have a house? Do I have food? Do I have my basic needs met? All these other things. And like, if I could scrounge some bucks up for some cigarettes at the time, I was going to do that, you know, whatever that pleasure, those little things that you can seek to make those hard times easier. And then when you add on, you know, should I quit smoking? Can I quit smoking? All of that stuff on top of it. Do you think that it feels overwhelming for some people? Because that was something that I felt at the time. You know, people at one point, I didn't have a house and I was quitting drugs, certain drugs, and people telling me now you need to quit smoking. I was like, you know, that's too much right now. Like, I'll worry about that later. And that's where I mean, like, does it feel coercive to try to work that in, or should we take that opportunity at the same time, you know?
No, I don't think it's coercive, because I think it is true that most people, especially when they get to a certain age, and again, I don't have to tell you all this, the smoking catches up with you, right? The longer you do it. And so the people that I work with are adults, and they're in their 40s, 50s, even older, and they have other health issues, and they want to do something about their smoking. And they're really, really open to vaping. And if they can't make the switch, it's just because we haven't found the right way yet. That's my opinion. You know, they haven't found, again, finding the right product, the right amount of nicotine. The other thing that I will say, I think that makes it hard right now, not even for vulnerable populations, but going back, referencing that article in the New York Times, is really one of our main goals is to create a culture of vaping, to supplant the culture of smoking. And so if you are outside of a methadone clinic or a shelter, or many organizations that work with people who use drugs, have stopped using, there is a culture of smoking there in front of them. And then the communities they live in, it's normalized, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that article in the New York Times, when they're outside the bar smoking, or outside the dining huts, all having a cigarette together, I'm just saying, it's like, we want that to be a culture of vaping. Everybody's going outside to vape. Or actually, I'm for people vaping inside, because we know it's secondhand vape is, but still, if whatever, you want to be courteous to people, we need to create a culture of vaping, and it's social and people can join it. And so we don't really have that yet, right? Can I bum a cartridge?
Yeah, that's not a thing.
Can I bum some? You got some strawberry liquid, man? Come on, give me some.
I've shared liquid. I have to say, I've given people liquid.
Cool,
Yeah.
cool.
Oh, sure.
They always want to
You
give,
got
they
a
want to take a
Juul?
hit off your vape. I'm like, no, not in this day and age. But the thing that hit me
Right.
about that article, I think, was that the backlash against vaping, especially with young people. And I think it's ironic that you're getting from the CDC and FDA and Campaign for Tobacco for Your Kids and stuff. All these early 20-somethings were all kids who were growing up in the middle of this epidemic of vaping, who are rejecting vaping to smoke, and saying vaping's not cool. And if you vape, you're a douche, just smoke, you know. I mean, I think it's somebody in that article literally said that. I mean, he said, just smoke, you know, you look like a dork or whatever. And that, a lot of that's been caused by the authorities who are trying to get these kids to stop vaping 3, 4, 5 years ago. And now they're like, okay, well, we believe you. Vaping's dangerous and it's not cool. And I would have gotten brainworms, so I'm smoking instead. You know, I mean, look at what that accomplished. And it's and we did have sort of a vape culture forming. You know, we had vape meets and, you know, shows, and you had people hanging out in vape shops. You know, I always joke that vape shops were like, you know, some dude's basement, you know, because he had the leather couch and the music and stuff, but it still had some kind of culture that was forming there. And the government's been chipping away at that. They, you know, they're banning stuff so that, and taxing stuff so much that these shops are closing down. Spike's shop closed down. I saw you tweeted about that. You know, I mean, that has been around for I don't know how long. It's crazy. So how do we turn around now and say, okay, now we need to form this vape culture now that we're being called douchebags and you know, that it's ridiculous and it's so uncool now, and vaping's only for quitting smoking. It's not. That's another thing that happens, is that you're not allowed to use it unless you're trying to quit smoking. So if you haven't started smoking yet, but you want to start smoking, then you can vape to quit.
It's like the idea that, you know, using a safer product has to come with a prerequisite of first, you know, harming yourself, I think is absurd.
Right.
But I think I thought of something before when we were talking about this, and now I can't remember what it was, but I think part of that is that, oh, I know what it was, because we were talking about how people who had other drug addictions or problems with drugs wouldn't give up the smoking. And it's funny how that got flipped on its head, and they used that to say, look, smoking's harder to quit than heroin. And then and that's where they got that from, was that, well, people can kick heroin, but they can't quit smoking,
Yes.
And so then they use it to lie about how bad smoking is, not even looking at what's going on in these people's lives. And they do the same thing right now with the vaping. They're lumping in vaping with smoking for Indigenous people, LGBTQ, minorities, Black people. They're using those mental health, people with mental health problems or challenges, and they say, okay, well, these people all smoke more than other people, so we need to make sure they don't vape. I mean, how do we change that message? Because it's similar with the drug issue, because with drugs, those groups tend to get hit harder with substance use too, right? So nicotine kind of just falls under that. And so it's sort of all kind of the same, would you say the same group in that sense?
Well, I want to say something again about that New York Times article, that it was annoying in so many ways, because you go around the Lower East Side or Greenwich Village and you ask a bunch of 20-somethings who are smoking their opinions. Don't take that and run with it. I just hope they don't try to create another drug hysteria around what a bunch of 20-somethings say about smoking, because we know that people in their 20s, the way they use nicotine or whatever their other drugs of choice, in 10 years, the vast majority will not use drugs in the same way. People mature out of drug use. It's just part of being human. What you did when you were 21 is not what you're doing when you're 41 for most people. And so it was really interesting to me. The part that I thought just really hit me, having lived through the panics around vaping, is when one of the women said, it's not cool to have a USB in your mouth. And it wasn't that long ago when it was really fucking cool to have a USB in your mouth, whether it was Juul or another one, right? And so this is what we say all the time. Those of us who think about drugs, write about it. There are drug trends, and they come and they go. And so the Juul trend was one that I wanted to stay, because that was helping also to create a vaping culture, like what you were saying, Kristen. Definitely. In New York, we used to have vaping bars, and they were great. People could go. There's all these different flavors you could choose. You can mix and match. People could hang out, just like bars were alcohol, or Starbucks or what have you. So these trends, they come and they go, and we knew it. We called it. We said, you look at that data, and the rate of young people using vaping has gone up because it's cool, it's fun, they can rebel, and they want the benefits. Let's never forget about that. Young people are tremendously stressed in so many ways in school, to perform, to get good grades, to be perfect. With the pandemic, we don't even have to go there in terms of, so they're turning to nicotine, some of them, to meet real needs of energy, concentration, focus, right? But it's a trend. It went up, and then we saw, and we knew that, but unfortunately, our opponents took advantage of when it was going up and used it to ram through flavor bans and all kinds of other legislation that just made it more difficult for adults to get these products. And now we're in a situation where vape shops are closing because of the PMTA process, et cetera. But just there are, and there will be more trends. We don't know what they will be, but that's how it works with drugs, especially under prohibition.
Sure.
Yeah, that's true.
Absolutely.
So frustrating. You just listen to you talking about it, because we knew it was a trend. We knew that these kids weren't becoming daily users. We knew a lot of these kids would have otherwise been smoking. They were already high risk, and they just denied, and said, nope, this is an epidemic. And that whole narrative was just so infuriating. It still is, because they still keep flavor. Adults don't want flavors. These are clearly targeting kids. They're always every single thing that Alex read on flavor bans today, earlier in the show that were coming up, they all justify it or try to justify it by saying, these flavors are clearly just for targeting kids, that clearly, and completely, and they never listened to us. They never listened to, and there was a tweet I saw, I think it was for Colorado, they're trying to do a flavor ban too. And this guy, he works from one of the news outlets in Colorado. And he said, okay, this is really going to get to be a debate between all the anti-tobacco people on, all this big money lobbying between the anti-tobacco people on one side and the tobacco companies lobbying for flavors on the other side. And I wanted to tweet back at him. I didn't have time, but I just thought, you're missing a whole third side here. And that's the consumers who use these products, who should be a part of this debate. We should have a voice. And it's so frustrating that we don't have a voice in this, that they just completely skate over people who want to use nicotine in a safer way that's pleasant and affordable and easily accessible. And we're never in the conversation. And I thought it was really interesting, the article you wrote about women in tobacco harm reduction and how we tend to not have a real strong voice, even though I feel in my experience, we're kind of behind the scenes a lot, like with CASA, there's always been behind every, guy in the front on the camera or in, being interviewed for the articles, who was the president or whatever, there was always a bunch of us women in the back getting all the minutia done, or egging them on and go on, you can do this. And I think your article really struck me, and I contacted you immediately after I saw your tweet about that and said, how do I get involved in this? Because I think it's great. And I was wondering what caused that, and I'm going to share the article here in the chat. What caused that impetus of, or that, what was the impetus of, okay, women need a voice, and what made you, I know the COP thing was part of it, but what brought that about wanting to form a women in harm reduction thing? What do you think that we could do where we make a difference that hasn't happened up until this point?
Well, like I said, I've been in this work for maybe about 6 years now. And I don't see gender parity on any level. I don't know if it's gotten worse or it's just always been this way, but I didn't see it getting better. And, that bothers me. It's like, having that gender parity, hearing the voices of women. And, because I work in different areas, I'm a journalist, I'm a filmmaker, I really notice it. I notice it when you read articles and you see who's quoted, and there are no women THR experts quoted in articles. There'll be 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7 people interviewed, and there'll be no women. That's a problem. And it's easily solvable because there are women all over the world who can give a journalist a quote. It's something we pay attention to at Filter. We want our writers to reach out to different groups of people. We want to hear what different people have to say, not the same old people. Not that there's anything wrong with what they're saying, but we want to just widen it out. When I look at who has podcasts and YouTube channels, I don't see hardly any women. And I don't understand why. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody or trying to call out or cancel anybody, but it has to change. I don't understand why. I mean, it doesn't take much to put up a podcast, or, I mean, you have to invest in some stuff, right? But why is that? Why don't we see that? When, there's been 2 feature documentaries made about the war on nicotine and vaping and tobacco. And both of them were made by Aaron Biebert. And both of them almost overwhelmingly feature men, just one male talking head after another. You Don't Know Nicotine, there's a few more women in that. And by the way, I was a backer. I was a Kickstarter backer of that film because I wanted Aaron to get the money to make it. It's really important. But when I got the poster for the film, when it was coming out, it was a gorgeous poster. And there were the names of 11 men on it who were featured in the film, not one woman. Yeah. Well, I have a problem with that, Aaron. So I just contacted him and I was like, come on, Aaron, what's up? I know that you interviewed women for You Don't Know Nicotine. Why aren't their names on? So sometimes it's just pointing out, like I know he didn't go like, we can only have 11 men on the poster, or he didn't make the poster, but somebody else did. They're not thinking that, like, we've got to keep the women out. But if you don't have it front and center when you're doing this work, it can just be forgotten. And so I wanted to just put out the word to women who do this work to form some kind of an organization or a coalition, because of course the other area is when there's conferences. So who's speaking on the panels, right? The Mantle USA, Gender Avengers, they look at this and it's important. And they point out, and sometimes the organizers will say, you're right, we don't have any women and we're trying or whatever. And I believe that, right? But we have to point it out and we can all do better. And so I saw in THR, it wasn't getting any better in terms of gender parity. So I just wanted to organize a group of women, whether it's still in the initial stages, whether it's an organization, an ad hoc group, but pointing out when women's voices are absent. I mean, it's 2022. Come on.
Yeah. The question that I had written down here to ask you, which I think you just answered really excellently, was how can we raise up women's voices, more LGBTQ plus voices, and more non-white cishet male voices, just across the board? Because like you said, I mean, just in this space period, it's really predominantly white male dominated. Yeah. And I want to know what we can all do really to, whether it's encouragement or just general support, like you starting these groups, what can we all do collectively to raise these voices up and have it not just be this white male cis heterosexual space? Because I mean, that's me. I'm a white heterosexual privileged male. What can I do better to elevate all of these voices or encourage these voices and make it, is it to make it less intimidating of a space, or what can we do? What can we do in your opinion?
Well, I would imagine CASA looks at this and says, we want, to have as much, gender equity as we can in terms of who's hosting, who's coming on the show. I mean, affirmative action, making that central to what you do. And I know sometimes you can't do it. You reach out to a number of women and they can't do the show or they can't be on the conference. I know that can happen sometimes. So I'm not saying every single one and, just cancel the whole conference, but just having that front and center and everything. If you're launching a new initiative or if you're doing some legislative work in whatever state, Wyoming, and you want a bunch of people to testify against a bill, you want to make sure you've got women in the mix, that it's not just a bunch of men who are standing up there, that you actually have women who are part of that. So whatever you do, looking at that, and again, this isn't about perfection and it has to be 50-50 every time. But if you don't pay attention to it, it doesn't get fixed. I can tell you that. You don't pay attention to it.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting. Oh, go ahead, Alex. You haven't talked.
I just wanted to add, I'm in the process of updating our GuideStar listing, and I think it's new this year. To get the gold level, you have to include your DEI information, diversity, equity, inclusion. And so looking at the makeup of our board, Unfortunately, we are all white people,
Mhm.
but I think our
That
board
wasn't always the
makeup.
case, though.
Our board makeup is a little bit closer to usage rates between men and women. So we're not, there's 9 board members, so it's not a 50-50 split, but there's one more male board member than female board member. And I believe that's actually a little bit higher than the national average in terms of how people who smoke skew in terms of male and female. So that's a good thing. I will say my introduction to CASA and all of this stuff was largely through the efforts of women. It was Julie Wessner that brought me to the board.
Yes.
Julie Wessner has been a force of nature in this space, in speaking
Superpower.
for consumers and in guiding the rest of us. She's made me a better writer, a better speaker, all around, I'd say a better person. Still got a long way to go. But I've always seen women in leadership positions in the vaping space in THR. People were mentioning Amanda Wheeler, Cynthia Cabrera was the head of the trade association for a while, and I always thought that was remarkable, and I was happy to see it, and I felt like that spoke volumes of not just the fact that this is for everyone, but it really is sort of the grassroots origins of all the stuff that we're doing, and to me, it felt like the female influence, at least from the advocacy side of things, it doesn't translate to the industry necessarily, but I always felt like that was a positive, at least for what we were doing. So my 2 cents there.
And it's not just in the world of tobacco harm reduction. I mean, you look at the cannabis space. I mean, they're struggling in the same way to have more women voices represented, whether it's they're doing the advocacy or they own the stores. So they're paying attention to women, people of color, people who have been most affected by the war on marijuana, making sure that they are part of this new industry, making the decisions about how to roll out, recreational marijuana in that state. And I think other areas, we're in a different time now with Me Too, Black Lives Matter, and then the movement around people who use drugs, right? Nothing about us without us. You're not going to be passing these policies if you don't talk to people who use fentanyl or use meth or use whatever the drug is. Our voices, whether it's in advocacy or research, we want and we will be part of that. So tobacco harm reduction, it's not siloed out. Every organization is grappling with how to have real representation. And it's been a long time coming, and it's going to take a while, but there has to be a focus on that. You can't just write something up and like, here we go, and we're good to go. It has to be thought out how you're going to do that. And sometimes you just have to call on people to say, come on, there's no women on this panel, and having a woman moderate doesn't cut it.
Right. Yeah.
It often seems though that when we're talking women, I mean, I've got a few points. My brain's just reeling right now with all these things I want to spew out. First of all, one of them being, it's hard because it was something I touched on before with the LGBTQ, which we do have members on our board, and Black people, Indigenous peoples, they're not big vapors, they're not big snooze users, because we do all different harm reduction products. So that gives us a much smaller pool of those groups, and women too. Women were a much like Mark just said, probably about in the early days, 15% of his customers were women. And I noticed that it's kind of weird because with people involved in CASA and in the early days, it was such a force of women with Julie and Yolanda and Teresa and Elaine. And it was a bunch of, myself, we were
I didn't know that.
So it's kind of maybe off from what the actual percentages of the makeup of the market is for vaping. because my husband started vaping the same time I did, and I'm the one who got us started with it and got into advocacy. So it's kind of, but I had more time for that too. But so that was the thing, is that, so that was one of my first things to say was, okay, these folks and all those people that we listed, the you know, like pregnant women and who, you know, people who really need to quit and who you know, use tobacco products more, we need to get them converted to vaping or harm reduction first before we can even get them into the tobacco harm reduction sphere. And like I said, because we did have a Black guy on our earliest board, and he just kind of lost interest. But again, that's another thing, is, you know, we're watching, we look, we want to see, you know, people who use snus, people from different ethnic backgrounds, you know, we want that diversity on our board, but trying to find, and then we'll find somebody who would be like, oh my God, they'd be awesome, let's get them on our board. When we get them interested, and they just don't have the time for it, because most of it's volunteer. And but anyhow, now that I had that say, really quick, what do you think that as a woman we bring to the conversation and to the table that's different from all these cisgendered white guys? What do you think that we can bring, do you think, that we should be included more, I guess is what I'm trying to say. What is your feeling on that?
Well, what are the specific challenges that women face?
Right. So
we know that women who use drugs are judged much more harshly than men are.
Okay.
So bringing that, you know, what is that about, and kind of unpacking that. Pregnant women who smoke are some of the most vilified.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Forget about it. I mean, the hostility, the hatred. And so talking about those experiences.
Okay.
You know, making, I don't know. I don't think I'm exactly answering that. I don't know if I have a real answer to that. But obviously, women experience, being a woman in this world is very different in some ways than being a man. You know.
Yeah, I didn't realize the stigma thing. That's interesting, and I never really thought about it. But now that I think about it, I was a closet smoker. You know, I mean, I was very embarrassed about smoking. I didn't want people to judge me in that sense. Whereas my husband was just kind of like, whatever, you know? And that's interesting. That's a good viewpoint, especially probably if you have kids. Because I always felt judged because I had kids. I never smoked during my pregnancies, and I always was outside. I didn't smoke around them, you know, so I felt very conscientious of that, you know, but I'm sure people were judging me. And I'm sure that was one thing, like probably why I was a closet smoker, which again, probably would make you do it for a longer time if you feel like you can't come out that stigmatizing effect. Yeah, I suppose that's, plus a lot of us, you know, our women, our parents, and, you know, my kids, in spite of the fact that I am a THR advocate, all of them, not all of them, the youngest one hasn't, thank goodness, but they all started smoking at some point. Now they almost all vape now too. My stepdaughter, she still smokes, but I didn't raise her. So, but my kids know if they come to my house with a cigarette. But yeah, it's,
you know, what are the challenges for women when they try to transition to a safer nicotine product? What are the challenges for them? I mean, we know that sexism is structural, right? And so how would you address those structural drivers of oppression? So then is it more difficult for women to transition? If so, why? If it's not, why not? When they do research, do they make sure, we know a lot of research, they don't include women for various reasons. Research around nicotine use and are they making sure they recruit women? We know that some vape shops are not very welcoming to women. They're, I remember there before I think it's closed now. It was Dragon Vapes in Chinatown, and it was just full of men blowing clouds. Like, I don't think women would feel comfortable in there. You know, I'm glad the guys had a place to go, but can you make room, you know, for some women? So having spaces that are comfortable for women. And so talking, you know, putting that front and center, I think is important.
Yeah, that's a conversation that right before the show, Kristen and I were actually having, is that all too many vape shops really just feel like man caves, you
Mhm.
know, and again, just as a man looking at it, and trying to put myself in a woman's shoes, it's either intimidating or you just don't want to be there. You don't feel welcomed. You don't feel safe in that space, for whatever reasons there. And yeah, how can we better address that? How can we get more women in these roles, in these entrepreneurial roles,
Mhm.
and things like that, similar to, the cannabis space where we want people of color in those, people who've been most affected by that, the prohibition of cannabis in those spaces, in that business space. And can we do that with women and people of color in vape shops as well, to make that space more welcome, as opposed to, again, just another white male dominated cloud comp in every vape shop that you walk into. So, yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing is product development. And I mean, because if you
Mhm.
think about it, a lot of researchers would just go into a vape shop and be like, okay, what are people using there? But the people were all just guys,
Mhm.
so they had big mods and they were trying to make big
Right.
clouds or whatnot. And for myself, I always wanted something discreet that fit in my hand, that wasn't this big thing that I felt like I was holding a soda can, I mean, and yeah, they can't really, without hearing from women, they can't, seems like by guys for guys, and that was pretty much women. They just had to deal with what
Mhm.
they were given. And then some of the things that came up were, some of the names they put, some of the advertising where, I don't want to be walking around with a bottle of e-liquid with a naked woman on it, with
Mhm.
derogatory
Thank you.
terms about women on
Mhm.
it, which I have
Mhm.
seen, and yeah, that's a good
Mhm.
point. That's, as I'm talking to you, I'm learning how women should have a voice. So yeah,
I,
because we
I,
want them to quit too,
Mhm.
So,
I, I
oh, go ahead.
sorry, I keep trying to wedge myself in, because I think you brought something up, Kristen, that it is the product development side of things, and
Mhm.
and for me now, I'm doing the same thing. I've got a bunch of stuff running through my head that I wanted to bring up, but Sweden is a really good example of a place where these reduced risk products are available, and the men who smoke are adopting snus, but women in Sweden don't really find it palatable. And of course, the products have not, up until I would say recently, been tailored to women's preferences or needs.
Mhm.
But Bengt Viberg, who is from Sweden, has the patent on the sting-free snus. And he was inspired, of course, to develop this product because of his wife, who I believe smokes, or excuse me, or smoked, and was unable to transition to snus because she didn't like it.
Mhm.
And this is also in line with meeting people where they're at, and women are half the population. So it's I think it's very important for manufacturers to design products that do include women's preferences and needs. But I see that sort of hang up there. Kristen described a product that appeals to her as a woman, but that has been maligned in the media as a product that is designed to hook the kids. Which sort of all brings me around to a question for someone who is a journalist. How do we punch through this horrible, dishonest narrative in order to encourage manufacturers to tailor products to women? Or are we just up against big money here, or is there something that we can do as advocates to counteract this narrative on the cheap? I don't know if I've fully formed the question there, but I figured I'd ask somebody who is in journalism.
Well, I don't have a perfect answer for that, except I know with time, things change, and I've seen it with other drugs, and, the media is a key player, right, in whipping up the, you know, people like Stanton Glantz and Truth Initiative and PAVE, they need the megaphone of the media. They work hand in hand to create the drug panics, and they're they're succeeding. But at a certain point, it's not going to work anymore. And then the coverage starts to change. And I watched this with the drug war, with mass incarceration. And I think one of the things that this is what we try to do at Filter. I think Vice does it. There's some other publications. And we include, and this is a key driver for the change in cannabis policy and psychedelics to a certain extent. And that is a social justice aspect that we almost always talk about, that who's left smoking? What are the groups that are left smoking? And I think that at some point the media is going to shift. They're going to turn. And again, I've seen it. And I don't know how long it's going to take, but they will do the mea culpas. The editorial boards will come out and say, there was no epidemic of juuling. And New York Times has this time capsule. They go back and look. And I don't know if some of you remember the crack attack in the United States, the absolute hysteria around crack cocaine and what that led to, the draconian mandatory minimums. And now these major corporate newsrooms, they have said we were wrong. They've kind of apologized. They need to do a lot more, make reparations and real apologies to the people that have been in prison for decades, right? I think the same thing is going to happen. I think at some point they're going to say, well, they'll never say we were wrong because they don't like to do that. They'll find a way to spin it and then say nicotine actually does have medicinal benefits.
And we've been saying this all along.
And we've been saying it for so many years. They will say it.
No,
they
the media will claim that they've been saying it all along and then say and hope that we all just forgot that they were saying the exact opposite earlier.
Yeah, they'll say, oh, it turns out that these actually do have benefits. Who knew? They'll play like they're coming across this big discovery themselves and they need to put it out. Yeah, you're right. It's never an actual formal apology.
Right.
But it can shift the tide of public perception.
Right.
And I think with that, getting back to Alex's, how do we tailor things more to women and other groups? Once we break through those negative narratives and we can see the population as a whole embrace these products more, I think in turn, hopefully, that leads to manufacturers catering to more diverse groups and kind of spreading that out across the board as opposed to everything is black and stainless, and I think at least in hardware, for a long time, the industry's solution to that was like, oh, make a rainbow product, like make that same thing.
What I have.
Now we've met everyone's needs, and that's just not the case. But we definitely need to break out of that. This is designed for kids, because when we start making mods and tanks and devices and things in, shiny pinks and purples and all these different colors and things that will appeal to adults of all varieties, they will continue to make the claim that it's only for kids. And I think that right there is kind of that wall we need to break through first, and then hopefully all the dominoes fall into place following that.
The thing I'm worried about. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, the other thing I would just add is it really helps to get out of this country and go to a country that doesn't do things the way that the United States does. And I was recently, I was in Italy last month, and I was in Catania, and IQOS is huge in Italy, and talk about really trying to get this product into the hands of people. So they've got the really glitzy IQOS stores. You go in and somebody waits on you, and they're in really nice parts of the city. But then they also have 24-hour cigarette machines. And I posted a couple photos on Twitter, actually, and they're all over the city. And it's great. So this is a machine where you can buy cigarettes and you can buy the heats for IQOS. And it was such a revelation to just see this. It wasn't the first time, but every time I see it, I'm just blown away. So it helps to get out of this country and go to a place like Italy, if you can, or England. Of course, they're miles ahead of us. They have vape shops in mental health hospitals, right? You just go down to the first floor and get your vapes. And I think, and then so for us to keep us going in the fight, to know that in other places, New Zealand as well is doing better than us, but also as a journalist and a filmmaker, and I know other journalists feel, we want to talk about those examples to say, they look how they're doing it. And those examples resonate with people. Just taking you back from it to the other world of drugs, we've been saying that about overdose prevention sites. They've had them in Canada for 20 years. They've had them in Europe. They save lives. Nobody dies in an overdose. We finally got one here in New York, but we had to hit hard on that for a really long time. So that's another way I feel we can win people. And in terms of the manufacturing, how are they doing it in other countries that, are they appealing, are their products appealing to women or other minority groups, or, you know what I'm saying?
It's interesting that they have IQOS and vending machines in other parts of the world, and here we can't even get IQOS anymore. So
right.
It's been banned essentially. I think the thing that I want to ask though, and lastly, I know we're at an hour here, is okay. So if we get more women and more minorities and alternative peoples that are white male, I don't know, I think whatever groups there are, we get more of them involved. How do we get a voice, especially as consumer advocates? We struggle really hard to get anybody to call Alex or call me or Julie or anybody else in. I'd be happy to talk to somebody if they want to get a quote, if they want to talk to a woman and not a man. Obviously I'm going to say call Alex, but I'm just saying that, how do we get in the media? We've tried doing press releases and just interacting with people on Twitter and stuff like that. And it's really hard that, okay, we've got the people here who want to be a voice, but we need a megaphone. It's been great because like Filter and some other groups have been much more in talking to people from in our circles, although I wish they'd talk to Kasab more, but how do we get more of that coverage, especially, the major media? It's like impossible. They only seem to want to talk to, like you said about that New York article, it was all anti-people and anti-tobacco people. And one guy who said, yeah, vaping's not bad. Do you have any tips on that?
I think you have to continually contact the mainstream media. You have to send them press releases. You have to say, we have these people who are available to comment. When they write articles and they need to be called out for that. You didn't include the voices of people who vape in this article. You have to keep on them. Okay. And eventually somebody will. I feel like it is a little bit better, actually.
It's better. From when I started, it's much,
let's not, I want to really shout out Kasab, because your organization has grown, your reach, the thousands of stories you have up on your website. That is a shot through the heart of these anti-vaping folks. It is a resource that I send people to all the time. The work that Amanda Wheeler is doing on Twitter. So let's not underestimate what we've been able to accomplish. The fact that we got, I can't take any credit for it, it's other folks, got the vaping tax taken out of the Build Back Better. That's huge. How did you do that?
Right.
A lot of help.
You made a stink.
A lot of help.
I would say, I think there's going to be a point where we have to take the struggle to another level. And I'm reminded of what ACT UP did. They basically took over the FDA. They went inside and shut it down. And I'm not opposed to doing that, because I feel these government bureaucracies don't listen to us. Like they didn't listen to AIDS activists. We're dying. Well, guess what? Smokers are dying, and you're blocking our ability to keep people alive. And I want to get in their faces and say that. So taking it to the next level of activism, I think we need to think about how to do that, because we can write letters, we can yell on the phone, we can text, Twitter, that's great. That can bring some change. But there is also a place for civil disobedience, to taking it to the next level. And that's how women got their rights. That's how people of color got their rights. That's how people dying of AIDS got drugs fast-tracked at the FDA and said nothing about us without us. And the research being done around vaping, the same thing. Vapors need to be part and parcel of that. So taking it, I think we have to, there's going to come a point, and it has to be thought out strategically, where we make their lives miserable by getting in their faces, because sometimes that's all they respond to, right? We've got science, we've got data, and they go like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not all.
They just ignore it.
But
well,
so
if you saw our intro, if you watch our intro, you'll see that Alex is at the Washington, D.C. rally, which got quite a few people to that. And that's probably the closest we've come to doing something like that. But it has been hard to get. I don't know if it's just because with smoking, you know, like even you know, with AIDS, with some other things, people were like dying right then. Right. And do you know what I mean? And so, or felt like right then. Whereas with smoking, it seems to be it's in this some possible distant future thing. So it's really hard. It seems like it's really hard to get people passionate about this issue, even inside it, and getting them to show up to testify at hearings and things like that. And yeah, I totally am with you on having to do that. But I think one of the fears is we organize something and nobody shows up, or only a few people show up. And then if the news is there and it looks like, well, see, nobody really cares about this issue. You've got 10 people vaping outside the courthouse or whatever. I think that keeps people from wanting to try to do stuff like this sometimes. I don't know.
Keep in mind the formidable obstacles against gay people in ACT UP, right? A group of people hated, stigmatized, politicians saying, you know, AIDS is a punishment from God.
Right.
There weren't, I mean, in the 80s, in the 90s, the level of homophobia, hatred, killing of people who are gay, lesbian, trans, right? Was phenomenal. And then AIDS hits. And it's like, there was a sense, they don't care if we die. Now, I know
that's what we feel like, though.
Yeah.
They don't care.
But maybe we need to increase that level of people are dying for over almost 500,000 people a year. Like maybe we need to take that up a notch in terms of, again, it's not going to be a one-to-one transfer what ACT UP did and what a vaping movement can do. But there definitely are similarities, I feel, just in terms of how smokers are stigmatized. And at least in the United States, we have a situation of who are the groups that are smoking at the highest rates? The people who are most oppressed. People who use drugs, people with mental health problems, low income, people of color, indigenous, LGBTQ, right? How do we organize something like that? I don't have all the answers, but it's can be instructive to look at how other groups have done it. What can we take from them? What would we not want to take from them in terms of strategy? But sitting down in the FDA, I just love the idea of that. That is a what do you call it? A group of people who are so Jurassic, who are so ossified, who have no clue what to do around vaping. I mean, if they've got some people who know, they're not coming forward. You know, Mitch Zeller has got to go. You know, he's a throwback to the nicotine wars, right? And I want to get in their faces because of this whole PMTA process.
And it always seems to come back to the businesses. And then that's the thing that's so frustrating for us as consumers is it's either, anti-tobacco or business. And nobody talks about the consumers. When a law is coming up, local news, national news, whatever, they go talk to a guy in a vape shop. They don't talk to any consumers. They don't talk to advocacy groups. They go talk to a guy in a vape shop, which often has a weird idea about things himself. It's some guy behind the counter and he's like, yeah, Juul sucks. It's all their fault. And they should just shut it down and let vape shops do whatever they want, or they do whatever they can to make us look, make vapors or people who sell vapor products look bad, and it's so frustrating that we don't even get it. Everything comes down to what the businesses are doing. And it's hard to get looked at as far as have them look at the consumer aspect of it, because we're just pathetic addicts getting taken advantage of by big tobacco.
And again, I'll give you the example of, because of the massive opioid overdose crisis in our country, for a long time they never talked to people who were using. They always talked to the so-called experts, and a lot of them were men. That whole dynamic has changed, let me tell you. Almost every article now I read about the opioid overdose crisis and fentanyl, they're talking to people who have overdosed and survived. They're talking to the people who are the most affected. That's a sea change, and that took a fight.
Yeah,
to recognize, and it will, in terms of vaping, I think, to talk to the people who actually are using these products, whose lives have been dramatically improved. But it happened in another area of drugs. It can happen, I think, in vaping.
And we've started to kind of clamp onto the whole nothing about us without us thing, because we're feeling that so clearly, of that everything's happening around us and nobody's talking to us. Nobody's asking us, do we want flavors? Nobody's asking us, do we want higher nicotine? Nobody's asking us, will we go back to smoking if you make these just as expensive and taste like crap as cigarettes? Nobody's asking us that. Not the researchers, not the lawmakers, not even in a lot of cases, the advocates, the harm reduction advocates for other sources. Do they even talk to us?
I will add to your last point. I know, Helen, we're keeping you a little longer than you'd expected, but for all of my criticism of the hearing in Washington State, Amanda Wheeler brought up a really good point during the hearing, and it was the research that we've seen from other cities and perhaps states where flavor bans, or in the case of Massachusetts, just banning the products altogether, have led to people going back to smoking. And there was a lawmaker who, in a very rare case, actually asked her a question, and she was able to follow up with, I will send you the study on this. So I think in some places, those messages are getting through. Maybe it depends on the messenger. Amanda's a very good messenger. But maybe we're starting to see some of the cracks in their bias.
And I know this is going to sound sexist, but people tend to see women as more trustworthy when they're speaking like that. I've seen studies on that, like with nurses and stuff like that. For some reason, it's got this, that if you're up there compared to a white guy in a suit who's got to be big tobacco, here's a woman, she's probably mom. You know what I mean? It's not fair. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying, but maybe getting more women up there to speak like Amanda's and things like that who are consumers and not just business might help make a difference in swaying some of these, because that immediate distrust of business, that's something that Matt was saying on the show he was on Reg Watch earlier, is that if you get out there and start arguing for your business, they don't want to hear it because they think you're just peddling poison to kids. So they don't care, That's why we always try to say we need more consumers to show up for these things.
It's interesting that you say that, because I've been thinking about, when I've been thinking about women in tobacco harm reduction and making sure we have gender parity, I'm looking at the other side. And does the vape haters, the tobacco control folks, do they front load the voices of women? So I look at PAVE. Yeah. PAVE is all women. That's the leadership. Robin Koval. But then there's your Mitch Mayer and other. But it seems like they have a lot of women who are they're in leadership positions in the tobacco control community and even the public health community. It seems that, I don't know, don't quote me on it, but just a cursory look, it seems like the people we're facing off against, there's a lot of women in leadership positions. And maybe it's partly because of what you just said, Kristen. They have a,
preconceived stereotype.
Exactly. Women take care of everybody. So
we're not threatening.
And we're not the CEOs of big tobacco companies. They're all white men, So it's interesting. It's interesting to think about.
Yeah, something to think about for sure. So, okay, well, we're like way over an hour. Well, not way over, but we went a little bit over. So we promised we'd get you out of here. But I told you we would have not have to worry about talking about stuff. I told you that.
I want to make a couple of recommendations.
Oh, okay.
For shows. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that we really need to talk about the book about Juul.
Oh,
Which
yeah.
one?
There's two.
Yeah, there's a few of them now.
There's two.
Is it Jamie Ducharme's book, The Big Vape?
Yeah, that one. And where is it? I wrote it down, I thought. It's the one about big tobacco, the devil's playbook.
Yeah, here you go.
Big tobacco, Juul, and the addiction of it's a horrible, horrible title. But I have to say, the woman who wrote it, these books are both by women, which I thought was interesting. The book, The Devil's Playbook, is remarkable. I disagree with so much of it, but she really goes through some really important arguments that we need to understand. That's
Lawyer enemy.
I would love to talk about that book with you. And then the other one is, there is a documentary. It was made in 2004. Maybe you know about it. It's called Bright Leaves.
Maybe that's the one I've been looking for. Was it a PBS documentary?
I don't know if it was on PBS. I wrote it down, and now I can't read my own writing. Oh, I know why, because I threw it. Okay. In my exasperation, I was saying, this is what they throw the science out.
It's really good for ADHD? Nicotine. I'm sorry, I'm seeing myself and my kids in you right now.
It's called Bright Leaves, and it's about John Harvey McElwee, and he was a huge tobacco grower. And the documentary is about growing tobacco, and do people who grow it, do they feel bad because it's a product that is used to create combustible cigarettes, then kill essentially half of its users? So it's kind of excavating that whole question, which I have no answer to, but I'm really fascinated by tobacco growing, and they know what the product is used for. Of course, if we had a sane nicotine policy, we would be using all the nicotine in that tobacco to create safer nicotine products, right? So that looks really good. And the family, a number of them became doctors, but I think it's something I'm interested in. I don't know if you all are, but the growing of tobacco and that whole economy, right? The New York Times recently had a good article about who harvests the tobacco, and it's a lot of immigrants from Central America. So it's just something I'm throwing out there to you. If somebody could be a guest who knows about that, I think it's a really interesting question. And then it also relates to synthetic nicotine. Are we moving to a world where there's going to be synthetic nicotine? And then what happens to all the folks who grow tobacco all around the world?
Right.
Sure. I mean, you look at, poppy farmers and things like that in the world of heroin moving into synthetics and fentanyl and things like this. What happens to all those farmers? And for most of those people, that's their livelihood. That's all that's available in some areas, especially in like coca production. For some people, that's all there is available.
Exactly.
Those are the only jobs that are available. So what happens to those folks and their livelihoods
Right.
as well? So yeah, I think that's definitely a very interesting topic, something we hadn't brought up before. We in our kind of brainstorming deep dive topic group here that we hadn't really thought of. So thank you.
I love it
for
love
that.
it.
Absolutely, that is definitely going in the notes. Going in the notes.
I guess I'm gonna have to break down and read that Devil's Playbook.
It is.
I've been avoiding it.
It's an incredible reporting. The reporting is just. She's in the room. She's in the room with all of them, or she found people who were in the room, and I couldn't put it down. I hated. It's one of those. It's a hate read, but it's a fun read and it's an informative read because there are journalists who they just cover tobacco. They know a shit ton. The revelations. There's one revelation after another in that book.
Yeah.
About the tobacco industry and how Juul fits in. And anyway, I'm a fan. Okay, thank you so much.
I'll trust you on that one.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you for joining us. This is fantastic.
Thank you so much, Helen. Thank you.
Take care.
You too.
Bye, Helen. Thank you again.
Vape on.
Yes.
Vape on.
Okay.
That's awesome.
That was fantastic. Wow. It's such a joy to talk to Helen, and it's been a long time. After I had spoken to Helen in the past, and I had her on my previous podcast, we talked a lot after that. We talked a lot about indigenous populations and things. And then COVID hit, and everything kind of fell apart, and I hadn't been able to speak to her for a while. So that was awesome. I love Helen. She's just a wonderful human being, and she really does give a shit about people, and I love people that give a shit about people. I'm sorry for swearing on the show.
Having the opportunity to
Julie can scold me later for my poor language, but yeah.
No, just having the opportunity to pick her brain was just great. I mean, and then she gives us that bonus of a couple of suggestions for shows.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm regretting that now I have to read that damn book, but
you own the book, so you're out of excuses here.
I don't
would have
want
to go
give
buy
them
the
any
book
money.
I bought it. I had to. To me, it's sort of a collector's item, I guess.
Hopefully, it'll be archaic and it'll be like Mein Kampf or something someday.
I have a book over on the shelf that's massive.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have gone there, but you know what I mean.
On, give me 2 seconds before we go.
Not aging well. That's what I meant.
I don't know. It sounds, with Helen's recommendation,
it's like one of those collector's books for me that I haven't gotten into yet because it's just massive. It's called The Cigarette Century.
Oh yeah,
wow.
And it's just, it's a shelf. It's
wow.
This is one of the few tobacco reads, and I have a number.
What the heck did that cost you?
I just haven't gotten into yet because. This is a registered weapon. You could eat somebody with this book. Like it's intimidating. The end of the index is 600 pages. So
holy.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Where'd you get that from?
This?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I don't. A bookstore.
You can get it from the internet.
Well, I know, but that looks like
where all books are sold. But yeah,
I get everything on Kindle these days.
That's a hell of a read right there. All right. Well, thank you. I think this is where we're going to wrap this up, right? I'm good to do the spiel.
Do the spiel.
Philip says giving a shit about people is what you do, Logan.
Philip, I do give a shit about people, and I think everybody here does as well, and we will continue to. But that's going to do it for us this week, everybody. Thank you to everybody who tuned in. Please go ahead and share this all over the place. The more that we can share voices like Helen's and everyone else's, it's just better for all of us. So please, I would encourage everybody to share this widely. It's been like a month since I've had to do the spiel, and I'm out of practice. Yes, if you have not joined CASA yet, please do. It's absolutely free to join. Become a member. Get in there. If you haven't submitted your testimony to CASA, please do. We still have like 13,000 plus. We're trying to get to 1 billion. So share your story, please. It's a great place to do so. Thank you, Skip. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, guys. Yes, excellent show. Thank you guys for coming out. Thanks for hanging out with us. Thanks for being here for this excellent discussion. Share it everywhere. Join CASA. Do all the things. There will be 2 versions of this podcast up on SoundCloud and wherever else you tune into your podcast. One being a shorthand legislative rundown, and then the entire episode as well. Those will be available this Monday going forward. And we will be back. As far as I'm aware, we don't have any hiccups next week, do we?
I
Don't think so.
Okay, cool. We'll be back next Saturday, 4:30 p.m. Eastern, 1:30 over on that other coast. Everywhere else around the world, you're going to have to figure out your time zones for it. That's it. Go buy merch. Okay, that's my spiel. I'm real bad at this right now. I got to get back in practice, the whole spiel. Okay.
All right.
I'm done.
Bye, everybody.
I'm good. We're good. Have a good